Good morning, everybody. I'm going to start my presentation. In 20 October 2019, I share a magical story about how technology has transformed classroom learning. The technology presented was the interactive whiteboard, aka IWB. And I'd like to start off today's presentation with a short video clip on the use of IWB for classroom learning from a teacher's perspective. So sit back and relax for the next 2 minutes.
We are always excited by the evolving technology for engaging students. One of the leaders in this technology are interactive whiteboards. It's all about learning faster, teaching better, and making learning fun.
One of the reasons I use the interactive whiteboard is that it engages the kids. They love the fact that they can get up and move around, they see it, they can touch it, and they get instant feedback. It caters for all the different learning styles, so the children who are visual learners, the children who are auditory learners, those that are kinesthetic, they like to move around the class. It gives them an opportunity to get up and interact with the whiteboard. And the third reason is they actually can collaborate with each other in small groups, and they can see the results of what they've done. Before I had an interactive whiteboard, I used to use a variety of things. If we're talking 5 years ago, we would just have a data projector. 10 years ago, we might have used an overhead projector. And before that, we would probably have just used a whiteboard, and before that even, chalk and talk, the old blackboard. So there's been a huge change in the last 5 years with the introduction of the interactive whiteboards. The interactive whiteboard enhances learning in a few different ways. One of the things is they actually remember a lot of things that they've seen because they actually see it, hear it, and are able to touch and interact with it. We use the interactive whiteboard in our flexible spaces in a variety of ways. We might use a whole group one, we might use it in small groups, we might use it for individuals. We use it across all of our subjects. We have maths and literacy groups working on the interactive whiteboards. So it actually enhances learning right across all subjects.
Well, Gary Collin isn't the only teacher that has experienced the benefits of using IWB for classroom teaching. In fact, many other teachers had similar experience too. The proliferation of IWB in school setting has really transformed how teachers teach and learners learn. Studies have shown the use of IWB in many school settings have enhanced teachers' learning as well as students' learning. Overall studies posit teachers are generally positive towards the use of IWB, even though they acknowledge that there are challenges when using the IWB. However, most of this research, as you can see, it focuses on school setting. In Singapore, there has also been the adoption of IWB in training institutes. One of the training institutes was a place I work in. They had installed IWB in some of the classrooms and inducted the adult educators, or known as AEs, on the features of the IWB, hoping that all trainers will utilize the IWB during their classroom training. However, there were some AEs who had used the IWB mainly as a projector to project their slides, even though it's 4K resolution. But they were just using it as a projector. Now that's actually sparked a concern for the institute. So what are the primary concerns from the institute? Well, firstly, the AEs are not using the IWB correctly, and as a result, they're missing out the benefits of the IWB. Secondly, Because AEs did not use the features of the IWB, they are less likely to discover innovative ways to use the IWB to enrich learners' learning. And there has been studies to show that show the adoption of ICT in classroom practices is linked to user self-efficacy. So it is important that AEs also start getting used to the features, and so in the hopes that they will actually enhance that utilization by exploring further features. Thirdly, from an economical point of view, it's not a wise investment for the organization or the institute to continue installing the IWB in other classrooms if it remains to be used as a projector screen. Now, these fundamental concerns largely led me to research on AE's perception towards the use of IWB. Now, there are three underpinning questions excuse me, and that are key in this study. First, what are AE's perception towards the use of IWB for teaching adult learners? Second, what were some of the challenges or barriers AEs face when using IWB for classroom training? And what kind of support would encourage AEs to use the IWB for classroom training? I have adopted a qualitative semi-structured interview with 4 experienced facilitators. The research the research method applied in this study are basically qualitative, and all the 4 AEs that are been recruited for this interview are experienced AEs. They have at least facilitated training with the institute for at least 3 years and have also applied IWB in their training. Ethical considerations was also taken note when we engaged the 4 AEs for the interview. For instance, prior to the interview, an informal call was made to the 4 AEs to gather their comfort in participating in this interview, as well as confidentiality of the AE's name has been observed by replacing their names with their initials during the transcripting. All right, and of course, AEs were also allowed to retract their interview should they feel uncomfortable at the end of the day. So the 4 AEs were comfortable with the interviews, and data was collected during the interview by a voice recorder and then transcribed into a Word document. For easy reference, the transcripts are also color-coded accordingly to represent the respective interviewees. After the transcript was transcribed, it was also coded under 3 main themes, and these 3 main themes are also supported by the relevant corresponding subthemes. Now I'll be sharing my findings and discussion based on these 3 main themes, and I will report on the findings first, followed by discussions on the findings, and then followed with the recommendations. So let me come to the first main theme, which is the perception of AEs towards the use of IWB. Now, in regards to the first main theme, well, some of the findings were generally AEs are positive. The 4 AEs were rather positive. Candidate S says that it was useful to be able to jot down learners' response on the IWB and retrieve it later for revision activity. It was also able to annotate text on the PowerPoint slides by writing on an IWB, so that kind of saves the hassle of doing the additional work later on. You can actually edit the PowerPoint slides on the spot. Secondly, another candidate also shared that it's a novelty for some learners, and learners are also captivated by playing on the game on the IWB. Well, this was actually the candidate F actually shared that during tea breaks and lunchtime, some of the learners were playing the IWP, some of the word puzzles that were actually from the internet. So they actually had some word puzzle quizzes and some games that they played during the lunchtime, and they actually enjoyed those activities through using the IWP. Candidate says that it's a way forward and there are immediate advantages in terms of interaction with the learners, and learners appeared positive and quite excited when they write on the IWP. So generally, we can see that AEs are rather positive. Those who have used the 4 AEs who have been interviewed find it positive in using the IWP for classroom teaching. In terms of the features that they use, well, the write feature, the erase feature, and the save and retrieve features were also used from one of the mostly used by the 4 AEs. Annotations again, and also erasing features. Apart from that, another AE actually, one of the AEs actually also integrated with website resources like Nearport and Edpuzzles. And these are some softwares where it can complement the IWPs as well. It's compatible with the IWP and actually use that with the interactive whiteboard. So generally we see that the 4 AEs were actually quite active in using some of the features, the basic features of the IWP, and they found it rather useful, and they're positive in using them. Now, in terms of the challenges faced by AEs when using the IWP, well, calibration seems to be a common issue among all the AEs that were interviewed. Some actually had 2 to 3 times throughout the day calibration issue, and that can be actually quite disruptive. Another AE mentioned that a recurring issue, which is a sensitive issue, which is similar, which is basically the calibration issue. And so excuse me, and the activity, sometimes activities requires the learners to write on the board because of the calibration issues. Learners were not able to write or touch the interactive whiteboard. Basically, the activity is not able to be carried out successfully. Another AEs actually shared that insufficient FAQ sessions during the IWP orientation, which leads to limited knowledge of IWP. There was a lack of hands-on practice session during the IWP orientation, which resulted that the AE actually had to use their personal time to explore other features outside training classrooms. Training aids, learning aids are actually are too technical and not very helpful. So from that actually kind of creates a certain learning, steep learning curve for the AE. Yeah, but the AE was very proactive, and AEs actually took their personal time to actually explore the features. Another key thing that was shared by one of the AEs is that a considerable amount of time was actually required to search for relevant activities on the website. AEs mentioned that when they want to integrate certain learning activities in relevance in relation to the context of the topic they are delivering, it can be quite challenging to find relevant topics or relevant materials that they can use along with the interactive whiteboard. Sometimes they have to start from scratch. So these are some of the key challenges faced by AEs. Now, in terms of the provisions to support AEs for using the IWP, well, most of them share that refresher training is a good thing to have because the previous session didn't have much hands-on practice session. So refresher training would be good, and to include also troubleshooting skills during the refresher training. I think most of the AEs like to be independent, in the sense that they can troubleshoot whenever there are issues that they face with the IWP. One of the AEs shares a very an interesting thought that to set up an online COP is to share learning from AEs on best practices of the IWB, so that everybody can actually leverage on that sharing from each other and also start to create more innovative activities. One of AEs has is pretty ingenious, shared that maybe the institute can actually provide templated learning activities that can be incorporated with the IWB, and also to provide training videos on IWB and pictorial guides to make it more user friendly instead of having all the technical jargons. Of course, having a dedicated support team is one of the recommendation as well from the AEs to oversee technical problems, because currently technical issues are actually supported by the staff of the institute. And so the staff actually, it is actually an add-on job to the staff. And it's not the primary role. The staff actually had to handle a lot of other functions and a lot of other duties. So it's a kind of like a secondary duty to the staff. So it would be good to actually have a dedicated support team, ideally, to resolve all the IWB issues. Now, based on these findings covered under the three main themes, we will then discuss how this finding corresponds to the previous studies. Yeah. In reference to the theme one, the first theme, perception of AEs, was the use of IWB. Generally, we can see that AEs are positive towards the IWB, at least those who've been interviewed, and they see that learners are actually using it, and they are actually encouraged also when learners use the IWB during the learning activities. And this observation is actually aligned with previous research studies, where teachers also found that the immersion of IWB in classroom learning increased engagement with students. Students will also be able to learn better from participating in the learning activities. As what we have watched during the video clip, it is somehow that similarities are there, that generally educators, teachers, and AEs feel the integration, the use of IWB for classroom teaching, it is a good feature, it's a good tool, right? And learners actually respond positively to that as well. Now, in terms of the features that the AEs have been using for the training, well, it also aligns with previous research. For instance, in the previous research, it said that teachers actually assimilated the IWB as a tactile and kinesthetic aid as part of the discovery learning approach. And in that approach, basically, students were actually were asked to write on the board and were asked to move objects on the board, and which is quite similar to what the AEs have been using. Only thing I could say is that teachers are actually more active in engaging learners to use the features of the IWB. Basically, getting learners to come up to the board to write and to actually get them to fill up blanks on the board or to move objects on the board. Basically, the engagement of learners with the IWB is more proactive as compared to the AEs. AEs basically use it on their own. Occasionally, they get learners up to actually interact, to utilize the interactive whiteboard. So that's the little difference between the AEs and the way teachers have used the IWB. Now, it's also observed that AE went through a similar progressive development like the teachers, where they actually spend time exploring the basic functions of the IWB first before they actually move on to integrate with other internet applications. In fact, there was a research done by Lewin et al. In 2008 that shares that teachers actually progressively gain their expertise in using IWB by tackling the basic features first and then slowly moving on to integrating with other software. So this is actually quite useful, something that we can consider when we need to design a training, an IWB training, or redesign the orientation or the refresher training for for adult educators for any IWB training. This can actually be used as a model to design the instructional design of the course or the refresher training. In regards to the challenges faced by AEs when using the IWB, well, AEs basically encounter several technical issues, and apparently these issues were also reflected in studies previously. Teachers using the IWB in studies commonly report issues such as calibration issues and connectivity problems, right? And which is something similar to what the AEs have encountered. So it seems to be a consistent technical glitch that IWB has. In terms of the lack of FAQ session and hands-on practice during the IWB orientation, well, in studies didn't really showcase or did not report how teachers experience with the IWB training. Although there were models that share on how teachers progressively learn, but they did not go into the details of their experience and how did they how did they find a training. So that is something that the previous study did not mention. But however, there is something that's relatively important. Studies have actually highlighted that the gap in technological pedagogical knowledge will actually inhibits teachers' further utilization of IWB. So during the interview with AEs, basically AE highlights that it is important that the technical knowledge be addressed to the AEs be equipped with the technical knowledge. While studies or where studies actually adds on in addition to the technical knowledge, there is also the technological pedagogical knowledge that's equally important for teachers to continue use the interactive whiteboard. It's not just the technical knowledge, but also the pedagogical knowledge aspects as well that has to be covered. In terms of searching for learning activities, the time it takes for AEs to search for learning activities on the internet, well, similarly, teachers also shared that they had to spend quite a substantial amount of time sourcing for suitable resources. Studies have actually shown that as well, that it's not easy to find related relevant training materials or learning materials to integrate it with the IWB. In the aspects of provision, well, we can see that basically AEs highlighted three key areas of support. First, the provision of training, the provision of learning resources, and the provisions of technical support. Now, based on studies, these are quite similar things that teachers have also highlighted, have also reported that the importance of training teachers to IWB is imperative. Similarly, teachers who are more independent in using the IWB tend to use more. So that also talks about being independent in addressing the technical issues that IWB has, which actually reinforces the need for troubleshooting skills, it to be taught to teachers, it to be taught to AEs. Research has also shown that there should be cooperation between school staffs and teachers who are using the IWB for teaching. So there's a typo error there. School staffs and teachers basically using the IWB. So which fosters a social collaboration of social learning. So That's equally important. Research has shown that social collaboration is important as part of the adoption of using IWB for classroom teaching. Now, it's also indicated in studies that the availability of a dedicated and competent technical support team, it will actually underpin the eventual adoption of IWB. And I think it's rather fundamental that such use of extensive use of IWB should incur manpower resources to support any technical glitches or any technical issues that teachers will face or AEs will face. Therefore, now having analyzed what these interviewees have shared and contemplated it with previous studies, basically we also need to boil down to how this study can actually help to address the primary concerns of the institute. And the primary concerns, once again, one, AEs are not capitalizing on the inherent features and the benefits of the IWB. Two, it reduces the possibility of AEs to discover other innovative ways to use the IWB to enrich their learners' learning. And three, IWB is costlier than projected. It's not a wise investment for the institute to continue to install the IWB in the remaining classroom if IWB is to be used as a projector. So we actually came up with a three-pronged approach, recommendation. All right, in the three-pronged approach. First, engagement with AEs to utilize the IWB. Second, looking at holistic training for IWB. And third, provisions of learning aid. In the areas for engagement with AEs to utilize the IWB, first, to include mentoring AEs to have experienced AEs using the IWB to mentor those AEs who are not so well versed. Also offer IWB refresher training course, sharing of success stories of AEs. Institute can consider also getting stories from AEs, the stories from these interviews can be also be shared with other AEs, so that there can be also a peer and cross-learning for each other. Setting up a focus group or an online sharing platform is so that AEs can actually share relevant resources with each other. That includes also editable activity templates that can be incorporated within IWB. Now, in the areas of holistic training for IWB, training can scaffold over 3 stages. This is something that we pick up from Lewin et al., studies from Lewin, that we can actually stage out the training for IWB for AEs. For instance, first introduce the basic features and the troubleshooting skills. And second stage, the advanced features and developing learning activities using the features of the IWB. And third, integrating the IWB with software applications and internet games for classroom facilitation. So it is staged out, scaffolded, so that there's also continuity for AEs to continue to use the IWB. All right, as they learn more features, more interesting ways of developing activities, that it also encourages them to continue to use the IWB for their facilitation. And in terms of the provisions for learning aid, that could be also easily accessible user guides, troubleshooting guides, more appropriately visual aids, and didactic videos to allow AEs to also self-help should they need to troubleshoot or should they encounter any issues with the IWB. At least they can have the first level of self-help before engaging the technical team. Of course, having a dedicated team to having a dedicated support is also something that is we have also considered, but manpower is always an issue, so there might be a costing to that as well. Right, so currently these are basically the 3 recommendations, and as all research, there are also strengths and limitations. Limitations of this research is that the sample size is rather small because it's only 4 AEs who are actually involved in the interview. Compared to a quantitative research, where actually more data can be obtained by a research method. Now, of course, that can actually gather more inputs. However, there's also limitations to that because you do not get an extensive experience background and experience of how AEs actually feel about using the IWB. Now, also due to this limited sample size, it would basically also not represent, it will not fully represent the population of AEs in the institutes or the rest of AEs in general. Another limitation is there's a possible sampling bias because of the 4 AEs that we have selected for these interviews, that they have actually used, they're largely similar characteristic basically because all of them have actually used the IWB, at least basic functions, and most actually used beyond the basic functions, and in comparison to those who have not used. So there's some biasness in that, but sampling biases in that, but I would think it's actually a good approach, and because we actually get more learning, we're able to uncover more things with AEs who have actually experience in using the IWS compared to AEs who have not used the IWB and basically using it as a projector, because you wouldn't actually get much information from there other than they are not happy using it, they are not prepared, they are maybe not trained in that, but how they feel about using it, what features have they used, they wouldn't be able to share all this information. So getting the 4 AEs who have experience in using the IWB is actually a good idea. Now, what's next after this study? Well, basically, we can actually take on the next level, further research. For example, we can also examine the perspectives of the learners, because currently we are actually focusing on AEs. We can also examine the perspective of learners and the staff in the institute to provide a fuller picture, and so as to know how to implement how the implementation of the activity will be better managed and supported. Also investigate on how other technology can be integrated into the AE's classroom facilitation to create a technology-enabled learning environment. Right? So basically that's my conclusion from the study. Right? So that's all for my presentation. That's all. Thank you.